So let me now move on to our next speaker. So I'll switch to German because it's easier to read for me in German. Paweł Wodziński, he is a theater director and essayist and curator for Warsaw Biennale, and the curator, a founder of a theater association and manager Association for Contemporary Dramaturgy, a big social activist from 2003. He was a director and an artistic manager of artistic theater in Poznań. In 2010, he became the program director of Raport festival in Gdynia. In 2017, head of Bydgoszcz theater and the curator of the dramaturgy drama theater. So that reenact another project from 2017, Global Civil War, another project. An author of texts printed in Dialogue Theatre and some other magazines. So, Paweł Wodziński, the floor is yours.
Super. Tak. Dziękuję bardzo. Przede wszystkim chciałbym podziękować.
So thank you very much, and first of all I'd like to thank for inviting me here. I'm grateful that I can tell you a few words about Warsaw Biennale here, both about the institution itself and the activities that we've been running. I'll tell you how I made some choices regarding to the topics selected here, because of course I'm not able to tell you about all our actions that we've had. So there were several hundreds of them over the last years. So Warsaw Biennale is not an organizational office of an artistic event. That's a public institution created at the turn of 2017-2018. So we are very much different from other organizations which create or produce biennales. Yes, we do that every 2 years. We organize an event like that, but in our case, that's rather a supplement to a regular program, a summary of our regular program. The second aspect that makes us different from this kind of institutions is that we are not an art institution. We are rather an interdisciplinary institution that tries to combine art with theory and research activity, but also with political activism. So we make it pretty clear how we think about the program, which obviously leads to some attacks. We are being attacked because of that by our opponents. We do not neutralize our political stand. We clearly communicate our opinions, and we do it clearly. We speak out. So the first cycle of our work, which was completed in the first edition of our Biennale, Let's Organize Our Future. It related to the future, but it also related to the ways we could organize the future. So it wasn't only about some speculative projects related to future, but about the ways we could actually implement those ideas, meaning specific organizational, institutional forms in which we could enclose our visions of the future. So it was built in a very strict political context. So in fact, there were two main processes that we took into account. So on the one hand, it was about making culture just an object of marketing, this set of new neoliberal approach that prevails in socio-political life in Poland, and not only. And on the other hand, it's also about the increase of rightist populism, rightist politics, nationalism, or some other extreme attitudes that we've been dealing recently with. So we need to find also some kind of way to talk about it, to be able to characterize this phenomenon in the right way. So I mentioned about political stance, how clearly we define it. So we have a similar understanding for globality or globalization and locality, being local. We think that both terms are rather doubtful and unambiguous. So on the one hand, globalization is a political and economic process that changes the reality of local communities. But on the other hand, being local very often, and we can see that very clearly in Poland with our bare eye, it is also produced for political reasons. So locality can be also a product. So all protectionism or isolationism ideas thrive on locality discussed from political point of view. So how we could think in a more progressive way in this context? Of course, we think about creating different forms of cooperation, relationships, above this level and below the level of political national state. So we think about national and translocal boundaries. We try to make a difference, distinguish these two terms. So we think how we can organize the way we work together to tackle the global problems that relate to us, such as climate or technology. But we also want to get the idea how to create relationships of solidarity and cooperation at this local level or trans-local level. So this first slide illustrates this idea well. So that's the Kiev Biennale. Now we have the 4th edition of this Biennale in Kiev. So this event is curated by 5 institutions that create Biennale in Eastern Europe. So this program is co-curated by our team, which apart from Warsaw Biennale also creates Visual Culture Research Center and Biennale of Kiev, of Biennale in Budapest, Biennale of Art in Prague, and Survival Kit in Riga. So I'd like to show you also a few examples of actions that relate to global and local matters, and to present how we could understand this possible mechanism, how we could construct, how we could build this real mechanism for building those relationships. During the first edition, we had 4 meetings. The first meeting, the Polish Social Forum, was located in a local environment. It was about local representatives of associations. The second was called TransUnion or TransUnions. So it was created together with us by Jonas Stahl, a Dutch artist. So that was a meeting of representatives from organizations and initiatives that act above national states. So we discuss about organizations such as Black Lives Matter on the one hand, on the other hand, such as African Union or other UN agendas, for example. So we wanted to build a group of people where we could discuss whether there is any chance to create some mechanisms which we could use to solve real problems that are noticeable at this transnational level. So another event was a convent of women farmers, and that was a meeting of representatives of eco-feministic collectives from all over the world, from Bekaa Valley, Rojava, so South Syria, Chiapas, from Colombia, and of course from Europe as well, Germany, the UK, and Poland. In my opinion, this example was the most successful example of a meeting where it was both about sharing experiences and literally sharing seeds that women brought there. So it was very specific. This cooperation could start blooming because it was based on real farming practices that these women activists actually use. So the third event was a forum, East European, South African, Middle East Forum. A very long time. It spoke clearly about the refugee crisis and this anti-refugee, extreme rightist politics. It was to remind that Poland is present in the Middle East, South Africa, that we have students from these countries studying in Poland. So some relationships that were built at the time. It was also an attempt to discuss if there is any chance to discuss and create some other relationships, to create a different language, to discuss these problems. So during the first edition, there were several actions that we were able to carry out. They were very much related to local issues. So sometimes they were in contradiction to our main idea to find common ground. So this is an example of an exhibition called The Art of Foreign Artists Living in Poland, curated by Jan Simon. So it's about the definition of otherness, being strange. So it was to show about a group of people who are never exhibited in Polish institutions of art, not as a group, of course. We obviously do not think that they are distinguished by being foreign artists living in Poland. We rather wanted to make a strong introductory gesture to introduce them into this official space. Although Warsaw Biennale, it's hard to call it a public space. We also create discourse because we are an editing house and we have some lectures. Here you can see a conference which resulted in a publication of a book that you can download from our website of Biennale. The missing denominator Universalism and Progressive Cultural Politics. That was the English title. We are trying to find some framework, if there is a common denominator. If there is a common framework that is not universalism, understanding it as a European universalism that could help us to create these relationships. We know it very well from our European experience. Discourse related to identity, cultural wars never help to create these relationships. They rather tend to segment and divide us, to create some niches or bubbles. So these are the photos from Skip the Line exhibition, Populism and Contemporary Promises. Washington attempted to catch this phenomenon of populism not as a specifically Polish phenomenon or a peripheric phenomenon, but as a global phenomenon, meaning by showing not only Eastern Europe, but also other spaces. So this is a work by Szabolcs Spitzel, a Hungarian artist who shows Hungarian nationalistic narrative, the bird turtle, the whole story, nationalistic story, Hungarian. So drawing to the end, I'd like to show you an example will protect you from yourselves. Spanish Democracia Collective, made together with Serena Squad in Warsaw. That is a space of activists who were very active during the protests last year. So this board presents how documents how police breached law, the violence applied to organizations on people during different events or riots on civic society. East Europe Biennale Alliance is another initiative. This is the organization of 5 biennials. If I were to say what I think is specific for us, so there will be these 2 slides that will be most characteristic. This is the project from the series Landscapes and Bodies, and these are photos from an event that's a documentary spectacle, Model Slavery. The first project talks about working in mines in Coltano, Indonesia, Congo, also in Germany, in coal mines or gold mines. And the second talks about forced labor in the Polish and Italian context. It talks about Polish immigrants who worked in labor camps in Italy 10 years ago, and today how Polish migrants work in restaurants in Warsaw. So these works show, I'm not sure if these are structural similarities. Yeah, they show similarities, structural similarities between the 2 groups. What makes us different here is that we abandon the cultural context. So our projects very precisely define economic, political, and social fields, but they do not get into the cultural or identity field, which, as part of all cultural wars, we find them pretty risky. We think that getting into this field of culture would rather generate conflicts than alliances. So we prefer to move at this social and economic area because there are some specific topics that can bring us together. So last but not least, I would like to show you 2 slides that are compiled in a sequence. And I felt really sorry when I saw them, because this is the project Female Refugees, a documentary spectacle created by female refugees from Dagestan, Chechnya, and other countries. They created their own theatrical play where they were telling about their status of refugees. And that was 2 years ago. And this is a piece of art that is hanging in our window. It was made by a Warsaw collective. You can see it well here. It includes 130 names of immigrants, refugees, who were at the Polish frontier now, and they went missing. We don't know what happened to them. When I combined the two photos, we realized that this is the path that we've been going through, starting from presenting this experience in the mainstream theater, because it was also showed on a regular stage, to the banner of with names of people who just went missing. We don't know what happened to that. Of course, this is just a small section of what we do. I didn't mention our social activity or activity related to nature or technology politicians. I decided to focus on projects that relate to our main topic: globality, locality, or translocality and transnationalism. I don't know how to define it in Polish. Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękuję, Paweł
Wodziński. Thank you very much, Paweł Wodziński. Our next contributions which show that the system we're talking about cannot be treated on nationalist terms because it's global. And if slaves in Congo are collecting coltan and other rare materials for us, which we then use in our mobile phones, that means we're involved, directly involved. And then we don't allow them in here because we don't want them to share in our wealth that was generated on their backs, so to speak. Just a summary then, and the projects which demonstrate that and which address that in many different and interesting ways.